And I was looking at the symptoms of PFS and I was like, check, 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 check. And I was like, oh no, it was like my worst fear coming to life. And then I read it was probably permanent. And I was like, this cannot be real. Like this can't be happening. And then to read that it gets worse when you stopped it too, I was like, this is like humanly impossible. I mean, literally, like you could have a crash like that's unbelievable after stopping it. And then to find out there's no doctor that can actually help wean you off the drug. I mean, the extreme brain fog and everything, that still persists even to certain days now. It's like, and the executive function is just non-existent a lot of times, meaning like, it's like, I can't make a decision about anything. I can't be proactive about anything. It's like, I used to be so good with time management and prioritization and things like that. And it's like that. It's just, there's days where it's like, I could get nothing done. It's a very alone feeling to have to go through this. And it's something that nobody should ever have to go through. And, you know, it's just, and on top of having to lose the whole sexual side of yourself and everything like that, it's just like, it's devastating. I mean, it's
alienating feelings, I think.
Extremely. And I mean, I guess I'm happy I wasn't in a relationship at the time because I don't even know how I would have navigated that. And you can't explain it. So it's just, that's what's more confusing about it too. It's like,
well, when you go from being a super, you know, high functioning, high motivated person
right,
to sudden being kind of a shell of your former self,
right.
you know, it is. It's almost kind of traumatizing in its own way.
Totally traumatizing. And I was such an extrovert too. I mean, and people, I mean, I used to respond to people's text messages right away. And I went the last 6 months, or I guess, you know, mid to end of last year to the beginning of this year, I would just ignore my phone. I wouldn't look at my phone. I wouldn't respond to people for days or weeks. I mean, I became so disconnected. This to me, I could, with Accutane, for example, you sign your life away when you take that drug.
Yep.
I think everyone should absolutely have to sign binding papers with this drug that say this. And then actually, I read recently that France, I think it was France that put like a red box warning on. And ironically, they pulled the drug from that market because they didn't want to comply with the red box warning.
Within the past like week and a half, 2 weeks, that happened very recently. That's a really big step in the right direction, you know?
Oh yeah, of course.
That should at the very least demonstrate to people that, you know, they don't just pull a drug off the market for no reason. There's a reason they're doing this. All right, what is going on, guys? This is Mark Millick here with the Moral Medicine YouTube channel. Today we have Alex. Alex is a PFS patient who's going to be telling us his story today. Alex, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure, thank you for having me.
Absolutely, man. So let's start with this, Alex. What was your life like before you took finasteride?
It was great, to be honest with you. I mean, I was at the best place of my life, I would say. I was 27 years old, and I had moved. I guess I had moved to Florida. I was about to start pharmacy school. I had a really great job. I was very social. I had a lot of friends. I had a lot of relationships. And, you know, it's something that I guess I took for granted at the time, but I guess didn't we all in that respect. Sure. But it was, yeah, I mean, I was really happy. I mean, I'd never had any tendency toward depression or anything like that. So, you know, it's uncalled for, but such is life.
No prior health issues or anything. You were living the
life. No, I mean, yeah, no like mental health issues. No, I mean, you know, everyone suffers from like social anxiety here and there, but there's nothing, never medicated for anything, never had to see a doctor for anything like that.
Sure,
so
absolutely.
Yeah.
So when did you start or I guess, when did you decide to start taking finasteride? And I guess what was the reason behind it?
When did I start? Yeah. So it was in June of 2020. Okay. And I had done some careful research and everything like that. I had tried Nutrafol before, maybe one or two other supplements or whatever have you. But I realized one day, I think there was either a picture or something where I'd seen the back of my head from, and, you know, you don't see that very often. And I realized I thought I was like, is that a bald spot on my crown? And then, of course, my worst fear kind of came into play because I looked at, you know, either I took another picture or something like that. And I was like, yeah, that's what's happening. There's, you know, I'm definitely balding around the crown. And I thought it was just thinning maybe, but so I figured that was kind of one of the only options at the time.
I think that's how everybody kind of goes about it. You know, they happen to notice one day their hair is thinning a little bit, and, you know, and finasteride is sort of the gold standard behind, you know, control. So did you go through a doctor, or was it a telehealth company, or?
I went through Keeps because, of course, you see, I mean, at the time and even still, there was ads everywhere for that, and it seemed trustworthy, easy enough. In hindsight, obviously, it's just, I went through Keeps, and they assigned me a doctor. You send in the hair pictures, things like that, and they say, well, we deemed that you're a good candidate for it and whatever else, and and don't really get a whole lot of history on you, in hindsight, but
Right.
yeah, I did that, and I was assigned a doctor, and it's funny because I asked the doctor, I said, is there any, especially as a young male, I work in pharmacy, so I knew of finasteride before. I knew it was for BPH typically, but I didn't, I was like, well, it's a safe drug. It's been around for a while, and so I went with that and went along with what they told me, and of course, it was not the case at all, but.
Did they tell you any safety information about the drug, any potential side effects or anything like that?
Well, so it's funny because if you go on their website today, they haven't changed hardly anything in regards to that. But I asked the doctor because what happened was I actually, when I signed up, I gave them my name as Alex instead of Alexander. So they had to cancel my first account and then recreate an account for me for legal purposes or whatever. And so the first doctor, I didn't have access to this messaging, and after that, conveniently enough, because they had to redo the profile. But first doctor I asked, I said, as a 27-year-old, is this young for most people to start this? Is it safe? Is there anything that could happen? I mean, I knew that there was potential sexual side effects, things like that. But I got the textbook answers stating that, there could be mild forms of like loss of libido or whatever, which has never been an issue for me. So I was like, that's not going to happen. And then they said that I think maybe mild ED that continues to get better as you continue the drug, and it goes away completely with cessation of the drug. So nothing to worry about there. Right. And, I don't even think depression was included at the time at all, actually. And so, of course I was like, well, if it's only they said 1.8%. In fact, they avoided the question. They said, it's very safe. And of course they put in words like generally or typically or almost always, things like that. And so you miss a little bit of it, but yeah, they said it was totally safe. It's anything that was side effects related would stop once you stop the drug. And that was that. So I thought I did my own research after that, but I never found anything about PFS. It was kind of the same. It's a lot of actually videos of dudes saying, well, it was all in my head. And, even maybe it was a porn addiction, and that was what it was causing issues with my girl and I or whatever. And I'm like, okay, yeah, maybe that's believable, but
yeah, right.
That's about the extent of it.
Yeah, you don't think it's going to, you don't think it's going to happen to you, obviously.
No, of course, especially only 1.8% of people.
Well, you said you've done your own independent research too, and I can tell you right now, I did as well. I researched it for 3 months, and I felt
right.
Taking it, and it seems like you did your due diligence the way you should. You went through the medical system, and you still
exactly. You trust the medical system, so it's like,
yeah. So you said you were 27 when you started taking the drug. So what was your experience like when you started taking it?
So of course I kind of expected the worst, like for the first, month or 3 weeks or whatever have you, nothing changed. I mean, everything was perfectly fine when I first started taking it. So I thought, this should be fine. And of course I was actually kind of already convinced before I took it that there wasn't much to worry about. So even during that time, I wasn't overly concerned about, I didn't kind of expect to see side effects just because I was assured that it would be fine and do my own research. I figured, if anything, almost the nocebo thing, you know what I mean? I was almost convinced of that. So, it was virtually fine for months, at least, maybe not in hindsight. I think probably after several months, like there are things that were precursors to issues that I didn't pick up on at the time. But yeah, I mean, for a year or so, it was perfectly fine without anything noticeable, at least at the time.
So I guess that's the next question is, when did you start noticing things? Was it about a year after you started? And what did you first start
doing? Well, to be honest with you, I didn't take it religiously because I was also doing, I think, the minoxidil with it. Okay. And so I was just bad about remembering to take it on a daily basis. So for about the first 3 to 6 months, I did not take it habitually. So really, probably by December of 2020 is when I started taking it. Like I was like, I need to make a point to take this every day. But it was still probably 3 to 4 days a week, or maybe 5. But
Taking it every day, you were taking it at least 3 or 4 days a week, though. You just weren't as consistent with it as you could have been.
for the first few months, and then after, I'd say probably by the end of 2020, so less than 6 months later, I started taking it every single day.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people will take it just 3. I mean, I took mine 1 milligram 3 times a week for.
See, I was told 1 milligram daily. That was what was.
That's what they tell you. And then there's these 2 Australian doctors that I've seen on YouTube.
The hair loss show.
Hair loss show, and they
Yeah.
you can take 1 milligram 3 times a week, and that's typically more than enough for people. So it sounds like even though you weren't taking it every single day, you were taking it consistently enough to probably still see results.
Oh yeah, I mean, I started seeing results pretty quickly. It's within a couple months. I mean, I'd say I had also shaved my head like right before I started it. Okay. So it was hard to gauge really seeing results until it got a little bit longer, and I started seeing that kind of spot close up a little bit, and then within about a year into it, I was like, this is good, like a good deal. Like it was working, and it was did what it was supposed to do, and so I was happy about it at the time.
Right. So when did you start having issues then?
So this was what I'd say by probably a year afterwards. So about like summertime, maybe July or August, maybe September of 2021. I noticed that again, this is more of like in hindsight. I didn't notice anything at the time, really. I noticed maybe slight sexual issues, like maybe some, well, actually I noticed that there was no like morning wood, things like that. About that time, because at first it wasn't an issue, but I noticed a little after a while that was not occurring, which stupidly enough I thought was, well, I'm getting closer to 30, so that might be a major, that could be the contributor, but not like I hadn't had it every single day before that. But I kind of just overlooked it because I didn't think it was indicative of anything bad.
It sounds like it was kind of subtle in the beginning stages, right?
It kind of was, yeah. But then I realized after a while, I was like, man, this hasn't happened for a long time. But like I said, I thought stupidly, I was like, well, I'm 28 years old. Maybe I'm getting closer to 30, and that's just normal, even though it was clearly like an everyday thing before that. So it's obviously not normal, but
you're almost gaslighting yourself there.
What's that?
You're almost gaslighting yourself there.
Yeah, exactly. So I didn't even think anything of it really, because I was like, well, I've gone this long and it's not been an issue, so maybe it's not even due to that, obviously. So,
right.
But other than that, that was probably the first symptom, and then for a while, nothing really. And then in December of 2021, I remember it to this day. It was December 9th of 2021. One day, I just noticed I noticed that my penis was numb. Like on the back side of it was numb, and I was like, that's obviously not, it wasn't horrible, it was just noticeable. Obviously, I'd say like 5%, you know what I mean?
Right.
Reduced sensation. And I was like, that's not normal. But I literally was like, I'm gonna go to bed and I hope that it's just fine when I wake up. God knows what, like that's any kind of sound logic. But so the next day, of course, I woke up, it was the same, and it's like, okay, this is not good. I was kind of busy at the time, so I was moving and doing some other things, and I actually, for the first time, I went PRN at work, so I didn't have health insurance for the first time in my life either. Mm-hmm. So I was like, well, what can a doctor even do for me? Because they're going to be like, I don't see anything, I don't know what's abnormal. And I thought, again, maybe I'm not getting enough exercise, maybe it's a blood flow issue, something like that. But being, very well versed in like the body and the science of things, I was like, I think it's probably my pudendal nerve. It's got to be, because that's the branch that everything comes off of at that point. And so I knew, ironically now, that was exactly the issue. But I didn't go to the doctor for about 2 months because I was in school, I was working, and I was really busy, and I just thought that, plus I didn't necessarily want to go to the doctor and then have to go through all that, look at all that, feel all that, and not be able to give me an answer. Right. So I kind of tried to figure it out for myself for a while. And this was into now March, I think, of 2022. And I was like, yeah, I need to go to the doctor, obviously, because it's not getting better. I tried to stand up when I would work, I'd do schoolwork and try to work out more and stuff, and it wasn't helping. So I knew it wasn't like a blood flow issue. I thought I had like pudendal nerve entrapment, things like that from researching, because ironically, nothing still came up. Like, there'd be a million different reasons for something like this to happen, but finasteride or drug usage really wasn't one of them. So, and I said, I didn't know this was even a possibility with that. So I never really tried to look into it that much. And I think I did at one point Google that specifically, and I still didn't find anything about that happening, that drug and that happening specifically. But yeah, so then it just got worse and worse. And I can tell you about that if you want, but if that's in a different question.
No, absolutely. So I'll just say this. I mean, I know exactly what you went through with that, because I mean, for me, the first signs were slurred speech. And I've talked about this
Really?
in videos. Yeah, I had really just intermittent slurred speech, right? And then all of a sudden one morning I woke up, massive cognitive shift. I've never been the same since. It robbed me my personality, my intelligence that day. That was
I agree with that for sure.
And I did, like you, I did my research. I went online trying to figure out what could be causing this, and nothing was ever attributed to finasteride, right? I was taking the medication from there and for another, 9 or 10 months.
Yep.
Because it just didn't seem possible that this drug could be causing these things. And there really weren't even any, anecdotal stories about that, especially when it came to like the slur speech for me in particular.
Oh, right, exactly.
This has got to be something else. And you again, you kind of gaslight yourself in some sense.
You do.
But, so yeah, from there, what happened to
you? So from there on, all right, so I finally went to the doctor, and because it was like a month waiting period just to see a PCP. And so I finally went to the doctor. This was in May of 2022. So this was 5 months after this started. And he was like, okay, well, maybe we'll get like, I think even I suggested maybe we should get a scan, like an MRI or something like that of my lumbosacral region, because again, I thought it was a nerve thing. And like pathologically, I thought it was a nerve thing. And then, so I finally got an MRI in June, and it showed, I got X-ray MRI, didn't show anything really as far as that's concerned. They did like a lumbar MRI. And then they're like, okay, well, yeah, we'll send you to a neurologist, but the waiting period here in Florida was like 6 months to see a neurologist. And so like, I can't wait that long. So then come like July or August of last year, my parents live in Nebraska. My dad is like a regional manager for United Healthcare. So he was able to pull, thank God, some strings for me to go see a neurologist up there. I did, he did like a lumbosacral MRI. I mean, by this point, I had gotten about 4 MRIs. They were unrevealing. And this particular neurologist, I said, do you think this is finasteride? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm not taking any other drug. I know it can cause certain issues maybe, but he was like, no, I've never heard of that. I don't think that's even possible. So I left there empty-handed, which was devastating, because I'm like, I have to figure that, because at this point, after 8 months, I could feel it getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse every single day. So it's like an emergency going on inside of your body that nobody really cares to help about or really understands. And so it became increasingly like one of the most isolating experiences of my life, for sure.
Of course.
And especially sexually, stuff like that. Nobody can understand. My friends and everything are doing their thing. And it's like, I know, there were times I even had to skip out on things I would never have skipped out on before, but they're like, man, what is wrong with you? And I'm like, it's not even going to be enjoyable. It's like if I could even perform at that point, because I noticed like ED stuff started to become more prevalent as well.
Yeah.
So, it continued. I mean, I went through even further months of MRIs and failed everything. I mean,
and at this point, this is around what, mid, I think.
So then, so then I came back from Nebraska in September. Right. And then there was a big hurricane that hit here, and I was able to finally see my neurologist here in October. He was really cool. I mean, I could tell he was very understanding. He was very receptive, and he talked to me a lot, and he ordered everything from even like certain parts of my brain, he kind of tried to rule out everything and still couldn't do that. So then in November, I thought I had cauda-equina syndrome at one point, literally, because I had 5 out of 6 red flag signs of cauda-equina syndrome, meaning I had no my sexual function was diminished. I could not get, there was like the erection thing was an issue. I actually they diagnosed me with urinary retention because I couldn't feel really when I had to pee anymore. I mean, it was that bad. It was almost saddle numbness, meaning like almost all the way to my tailbone. And so I went to the hospital and because I was like, I don't know what else to do about this. This is getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And so they, did more scans, everything like that. And that's when I was seen by a team of neurologists, of fellows, students, board certified neurologists. They did cremaster reflex testing on me, meaning basically, I don't know, for anyone that doesn't know what that is, they basically, if you're touched on your inner thigh, then your like genitals are supposed to respond and things like that. And it was equivocal, meaning it wasn't responsive. Like, that's obviously a problem, but they thought, well, there was a specialist they were referring me to that was 8 months away. So it was actually about 2 weeks ago that I was supposed to go see this guy. And this is back in November. And so like, I cannot wait that long, obviously. So anyway, they went through all of this. None of them put 2 and 2 together that finasteride was the only drug that I was taking. And keep in mind, these are board certified doctors. Not one of them questioned it. In fact, that's, they had actually written on my chart that they thought maybe it was a somatoform disorder. Like I was making it up, or I had sexual issues.
Psychosomatic.
I mean, as a pre-pharmacy student, I was the perfect patient. I mean, I described to them, I'm like, I think it's here, 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 and here. And technically, I could speak to them in their language, everything, did nothing. So then I was just like devastated at that point and at this point, I had been going through it for so long, I thought that the anhedonia was definitely there. And I just thought in my head, I'm like, being in the medical field, I'm like, I'm not taking this as like emotionally or crazy, it's not weighing as heavily on me as I probably think it is, because it's cut and dry. I just need this to be fixed. I don't even need to know what caused this. As long as it's fixed, it's done, right. It's over with, that's it. But most people, I thought to myself, most people would have probably had a breakdown by a million times by this point. And even my mom had said something to me about it, but I just thought, it's a factual thing, a matter of fact thing. And so I went even to a doctor in New York and I got a CT myelogram done. He thought maybe I had like something called tethered cord syndrome, which is like a spinal cord issue. That was ruled out. This is now January of this year. And into February, I realized in February, I was researching. I actually never found anything until I typed in finasteride pudendal nerve, or pudendal neuralgia. So I typed in numbness, everything before that, never got anything until I typed in that specifically. I found an article that was regarding the abnormally evoked action potentials of the pudendal nerve with PFS. And then I saw that and I was like, huh. And I was looking at the symptoms of PFS and I was like, check, 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 check. And I was like, oh no, it was like my worst fear coming to life. And then I read it, so I'm probably permanent. And I was like, this cannot be real. Like, this can't be happening. And then to read that it gets worse when you stopped it too, I was like, this is like humanly impossible. I mean, literally, like you could have a crash like that's unbelievable after stopping it. And then to find out there's no doctor that can actually help wean you off the drug. So I had read something about how to taper off of it. I tapered myself off over like 6 weeks to 8 weeks. And I think that maybe helped avoid maybe anything further because I'd been on it for so long. But nothing, I mean, once that stopped, it obviously nothing went away after that. And yeah, it was devastating. I mean, literally it turned my life upside down once I found that out. And it was nice to find the answer, but not so nice to find out all the rest of it.
So, and you went through the medical system, I mean, really intense.
For a year. I have back-to-back records for a year straight.
Got MRIs done, all these different imaging tests and everything.
At least 10 MRIs, yeah.
And you
I got an EMG, 10 MRIs. I got a CT myelogram, which is like the end of the line. Like, I mean, it's intrusive. It's everything.
Yeah. The more you could have done.
I had to get a spinal tap too. I mean, they didn't even test my spinal tap for hormones either. I never got one hormone test throughout any of this.
Wow.
Any of the blood tests, anything. No one ever tested for hormones, which would have tipped it off probably right then. But
yeah, absolutely.
Unbelievable.
And you even mentioned the one doctor, hey, could this be finasteride? And he
right.
No, there's no.
Oh yeah. In fact, the other thing too that's interesting, he tested my A1C and everything like that, and they were testing me for diabetes. Obviously, they mixed the initial fasting glucose reading with the final one. So it showed that I was pre-diabetic, and I'm like, you realize these are mixed, right? Like it's obvious that they were mixed because the numbers were so off.
Right.
And so he actually, the first neurologist I saw, sent me back here saying, you need to go talk to your PCP about the fact that you're pre-diabetic, which was also actually a totally incorrect diagnosis on top of the negligence that had pretty much already occurred.
Wow. It sounds like gaslighting at its finest, man, to be honest.
I mean,
really, like, it is. It's really traumatic when you're going through something like that. And look, I mean, you have a medical background. You said you were going to go to pharmacy school, and you're hoping to still go at this point. You had to put that on. I don't know if you said that there in this video, but you and I talked before this.
Yeah, I was accepted last year, but I didn't go because I had met the medical issues. And
right, absolutely. So you even knew like how to speak the lingo. You knew what was going on with you specifically.
Oh yeah.
You still weren't even heard by medical professionals.
Right.
So that's a really interesting story right there. I'm really sorry, number one, you went through that. But when you came off the medication, because you've been off it for how long now?
Over 3.5 months. It's been, I mean, I started tapering off over 4 months ago, but I was officially off of it by the end of February or so. Actually it's beginning of March. So yeah.
Okay. Has anything gotten any better for you? Have you developed new symptoms? Have you seen
So I noticed pretty rapidly that the anhedonia, that's a tricky situation. I noticed that the extreme anxiety and kind of just hopelessness, that kind of aired out a little bit pretty quickly after I stopped taking it. However, the physical sides, nothing changed. And then, of course, everyone says that 3 months, maybe you can get better. Like I said, physical stuff, absolutely nothing changed. And then, I'd say my mood was a little bit better, but as far as concentration and everything like that, and that's another thing too, that happened a long time ago that I never really realized that was happening. I just thought I was so bogged down with all this stuff that it was hard to concentrate in general. But I mean, the extreme brain fog and everything, that still persists even to certain days now. It's like, and the executive function is just non-existent a lot of times, meaning like, it's like, I can't make a decision about anything. I can't be proactive about anything. It's like, I used to be so good with time management and prioritization and things like that. And it's like that, it's just, there's days where it's like, I could get nothing done. And like you can't even start hardly. So it's just,
I get that entirely. Yeah, man. So, I mean, I was a very structured individual before all this myself. But a certain time, and I would do this at a certain time. I'd work out. I was always trying to study for my next certification for my field. I'm a construction health and safety manager. So, like, what's the next best certification I can get? So,
of course,
this much time to study, and I'd come home and this much time devoted to going for a walk with my fiance or whatever it might be.
Right.
And all that, I mean, has out the window for me. So I do know what you're saying about the brain fog and the lack of structure that you have it.
And and you can't explain it. So it's just, that's what's more confusing about it too. It's like,
when you go from being a super, high functioning, high motivated person, to all of a sudden being kind of a shell of your former self.
Right.
It is. It's almost kind of traumatizing in its own way.
Totally traumatizing. And I was such an extrovert too. I used to respond to people's text messages right away. And I went the last 6 months, or I guess, mid to end of last year to the beginning of this year, I would just ignore my phone. I wouldn't look at my phone. I wouldn't respond to people for days or weeks. I mean, I became so disconnected because it's almost like I couldn't connect. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, and that's a wholly different side of me, because I'm usually the complete opposite of that. So
I hear that. So you're kind of actually describing what the next question is going to be. The question was, how has this impacted your life currently? And you mentioned the social isolation, the withdrawal.
Yes. I mean, once I found like the finasteride syndrome, like Reddit and everything like that, because I actually didn't look really into I wasn't very familiar with like Propecia Health and things like that. And it really was more so when I found the subreddit and everything, I felt very relieved, at least because I felt like it was like, people that I could finally relate to and people that I could talk to about it. I mean, that was like, kind of like, I don't know how to describe it. That was kind of like,
validating.
It's validating. And I finally, it was kind of just like a release of like my soul that had been pent up for so long, because it's a very alone feeling to have to go through this. And it's something that nobody should ever have to go through. And, it's this, and on top of having to lose the whole sexual side of yourself and everything like that, it's just like, it's devastating. I mean, it's
alienating feelings, I think.
extremely. And I mean, I guess I'm happy I wasn't in a relationship at the time, because I don't even know how I would have navigated that. I mean, I think that my parents and my friends were very, and actually I didn't tell anybody about this. I didn't even tell anybody I was going through this, like, as far as the numbness thing and everything like that, until after I went to the doctor the first time. So at least 6 months of it, no one knew anything at all. And I mean, that was somewhat, like, it was kind of eating me away inside, which I didn't realize either. But my parents were so supportive in that and everything. I don't know what I would have done without them, to be honest with you. But
yeah. And that makes it more scary because, I didn't tell my parents about it for the first probably 4 or 5 months,
Yeah, right. Same.
Yeah, I think I told you, I mean, I knew something was wrong in June of 2020, 2021, about, 6 months after I started taking it.
Yep.
To myself for like 4 or 5 months because I was scared, and I didn't want to scare my mom,
Right.
I called my dad one day and explaining to him, hey, so I'm having some really intense like speech issues and brain and cognitive dysfunction.
Right. So they couldn't tell that, like they couldn't actually, like, they didn't notice that.
Well, I had to see my parents. They live about 3 hours from me, so I don't talk to them all that much. I talk to them like once every week or two.
Yeah.
So I was able to hide it relatively well. It's only when you see me like in a social setting, like at work, when I'm supposed to be like doing a presentation or like supposed to be exercising.
Yeah, I was feeling. I mean, I was not doing well at work, and people were noticing too as well. It's like,
What for me, same thing. It happened abruptly, but I talked to my parents, and I knew there was. It's funny because I still hadn't attributed it to finasteride, right?
Right.
No way this can be finasteride, but I knew, and this is where everyone says, "Oh, this is obviously a nocebo effect." You just thought this was going to happen, and it happened. I never thought.
Same. I didn't know about it. Like, I didn't know PFS or anything, so there was no nocebo involved.
Yeah, there was no, for me, no speculation whatsoever that this could ever be finasteride. That's
Same. Why I thought, especially with mine.
Yeah.
With how bad this was and how like really truly extensive this was, I was like, there's no way. I mean, it was in the back of my mind maybe, but I was like, this has to be a sacral nerve injury. I mean, there's literally no way a drug could cause this to this extent,
I said the same thing. I sat there for, I was spending hours a day trying to just think about what did I sustain an injury within the past 6 months?
Same.
Head somewhere. Did I fall off?
Right.
And I think, and once again, you kind of gaslight yourself. I say that kind of as a joke, but I'm serious about that too. And then when doctors tell you,
True.
Everything is
medical gaslighting is just, that's like evil in its purest form. I mean, that's just so horrible.
Oh, it is, man. And honestly, I think there would honestly be less suicides in this community if doctors would at the very least just
of course,
if this is real,
at least be open to it. Yeah, like I don't care if you have no knowledge about it, at least be receptive to an extent of something. Like
yeah, because a lot of patients, man, I mean, I know a lot of people deal with suicidality with this, suicidal ideation.
Right.
It's no wonder. It's no wonder why,
And like you said, I've never been depressive at all in my life, and I know a lot of people that have, and I'm supportive of that and everything. And it still wasn't like I want to kill myself type thing. It was the fact that I don't want to die, but I can't live like this for the rest of my life, which is the worst position to be in. It's not fair, And I had said I would never wish this on my worst enemy this entire time before I even knew what it was.
Right. Absolutely.
Yes.
I think in terms of quality of life, I mean, honestly, I think this is one of the most heinous diseases that you
totally. Because it's a crime against humanity, for that matter. I mean, it's awful.
It is. It's unseen. You can't demonstrate it in a lot of ways.
No. Especially when you look normal and stuff, people have a hard time taking you seriously. Yeah, it's insidious.
So let me ask you this, man, because I think we're going for about 45 minutes to an hour here. Did you have, and I think we kind of already talked about this, did you have any prior knowledge about any of this happening? Did you feel like you received, proper, the proper information from medical professionals before you took this medication?
Absolutely not. I mean, especially the fact that I had specifically asked these questions. Mm-hmm. What's the worst that could happen? What could I look for that as a young, healthy male that would be an issue? And being given the untrue textbook answer. I mean, that information is so obsolete at this point. Like, I don't even know how they're allowed to still use that. But absolutely not. I mean, this to me, like with Accutane, for example, you sign your life away when you take that drug.
Yep.
I think everyone should absolutely have to sign binding papers with this drug that say this. And then actually, I read recently that France think it was France that put like a red box warning on. And ironically, they pulled the drug from that market because they didn't want to comply with the red box warning.
Within the past like week and a half, 2 weeks, that happened very recently. That's
Yeah.
a really big step in the right direction, you know.
Oh yeah, of course.
That should at the very least demonstrate to people that, you know, they don't just pull a drug off the market for no reason. There's a reason they're doing this, obviously.
Right.
You
To
know?
just not comply with it. You know what I mean? I mean, why would you comply with that? And
Right. Absolutely.
they have DRAs, like, which I think are like drug regulation authorities in Europe that stand up for people in local districts when things like this happen. And I mean, that's it's great for them because that's how, you know, they accomplish things like that. And it's just, yeah. And the fact that Merck had Vioxx, that whole failure before this, and still is like doing, and it still pushes this and everything. And then I also found out that the FDA as well, they opted to not, like, I think when the most recent additions that they had to put with the suicide, the potential for that, they opted to not inform the public sector about, or the health sector about that, like to not. I'm just like, that's unbelievable. I mean, it's not unbelievable
what the agenda is, right? I mean, they're really more about profit and sales at that point. I don't want to be a conspiracy.
Right. And see, I want to go into pharmacy for like the right reasons. I mean, I want to be able to like actually, I want to do it for like not the science aspect of it, but you know, to help people. Not a lot of people are like, oh, like big pharma, and like it's not the same sector at all. Like I would not be working for big pharma, but I mean, it gets eye-opening for me because that's how I'll help in my profession and moving forward. I'll have a whole different knowledge than a lot of people will, I think.
I would agree with that, and I like to see that there's at least for you a silver lining to, I guess, going in regards to that, right?
Right.
But this stuff is it's amazing to me that it's so easily accessible. You can go online.
Totally.
I think if anybody goes to the HIMSS website and they, you know, follow the protocol, I think HIMSS will recommend, oh yeah, you're a great candidate for,
of course,
even if you're not balding. You know, I've talked to people who have all pretty much told me that, like, I really wasn't even balding, but I just figured I'd start this just to be, you know, just to be safe for preliminary purposes.
That's another thing too, the preventative aspect.
Preventative, yeah, right, exactly. So it's incredible, man. Alex, really appreciate you coming on here. I mean, I think with your background, especially in sort of the medical field, you want to be a pharmacist. I think you hold a lot of weight with your testimony here. Before we hop off, do you have any closing statements you want to make, or anything else you want to say?
You know, I had said this before, and I don't know if I've said it publicly or on any kind of forum, but I, especially going into pharmacy, in fact, ironically, I wanted to go into pharmacogenomics, which is really the study of how people specifically, you know, genomically react to drugs, and how they, you know, that, you know, their genes affect the reaction and the outcome to drugs.
Right.
So I fully still intend on doing that, and I swear on my life that I will be diligent in finding a cure to this, and to, whether if I have to, you know, devote the rest of my career to it, I will gladly do so, because no one deserves to live like this, and I think that we can all get out of this. But I mean, I think everyone just needs to keep their head up. I'm sure it does get better. It has gotten better, I think, for a lot of us, at least to a little, you know, a little bit. But yeah, I'll be, you know, diligent and working towards that if it's not done by the time that, you know, I enter that exact realm in that research field. But yeah, I think everyone's incredibly strong, and I really appreciate everyone's camaraderie in tackling this issue as well.
Yeah,
and thank you for giving the opportunity to do this, for sure.
Yeah, 100%. And the more people we have on here to talk about this, the more publicity and more awareness we're going to build.
Definitely.
I do think there is the tide is changing. I think the community is starting to slowly come together, and people are realizing we have to unite, you know, and that's what's ultimately going to get us out of this.
Right.
But no, yeah, really appreciate your time here, Alex. And yeah, thank you so much again.
Yeah, thank you, dude. Appreciate it. Take care.
Yeah, you too.